Now we're going to start looking at statistics as a topic. And statistics really is looking at collecting and analyzing data to represent some sort of collection or population in order to draw some conclusions. So you can see sort of a general statement of statistics here. This isn't necessarily taken out of a textbook or out of a dictionary. It's just kind of my own summary of what statistics in my mind is. It's collecting and analyzing data in order to draw conclusions. And so there's a lot that goes into this. It's very vague and broad, but it does kind of get at the idea of looking at data, numerical data. It could be numerical data, usually it is. It doesn't have to be. And then you're analyzing some collection of data in order to draw conclusions. We do need to go over a lot of definitions here just to get the base, the foundational layer set, so that you guys know what I'm talking about, and you can understand questions that are asked, and really start to sort out what is being referenced, whether it's a sample or population, and what we're looking at there. So let's take a look at these definitions. A population is a set of all items being studied. Now I use the words items there to be very vague. That could be people, that could be animals, that could be plants, that could be planets, that could be any variety of things, businesses, lots of things that you could be studying there. And so it's the set of all things, whatever they are, that are being studied, okay? It's in set theory, we talk about the universe as the big set, and then you have subsets of that, right? And so in this case, we're looking at the universe. The population is the universe, okay, for whatever it is that we're studying. A sample is any subset of that population, okay? And really any subset could be considered a sample. Some are good samples, some are bad samples, and we'll explain, I'll talk about that a little bit here as well. But any subset of the population is a sample. We really have two different types of statistics then, and two different things that we're going to be doing. One, and this is where we're going to spend most of our time in this course, is looking at descriptive statistics. This is you collect data from a sample. It's a subset of the population. Generally speaking, populations are large, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend the effort and time and sometimes money in collecting data for every individual in the population. And so we look at subsets. We take a small sample, maybe it's a large sample, but a sample, and analyze it in hopes of drawing some conclusions about the population. Typically, that's what we're going to do. So the descriptive statistics are the collecting, organizing, summarizing, presenting. It's looking at the data that describes the sample, right? So you get your sample, it's the smaller set, the subset, and you're looking at different tendencies of the data, whether what the averages are, what the spread of the data is, that sort of thing. You're looking at the data itself. Sometimes we'll use charts and graphs. Sometimes we'll use formulas and calculations to do this, okay? But that's the descriptive statistics, is you're just looking at the sample and you're trying to come up with ways to describe that data. Inferential statistics, making inferences, is making generalizations about the population based upon that sample data. So you take the stuff that you learn from the descriptive statistics, studying the actual sample, and you try to broaden and make generalized statements and inferences about the whole population based upon that sample, okay? So studying the sample statistics itself, or the data from the sample, that's your descriptive statistics, and then making that assumption, making those broader generalizations about the population, those conclusions, are the inferential statistics. So there's really two scopes of statistics there. And we're going to spend most of our time in the descriptive statistics, learning about averages and ranges and standard deviations and different types of distributions. And then we are gonna look a little bit at inferential statistics later on, looking at things like correlations and regression, looking at projecting values out into future situations, things like that. So there are some things that we're gonna look at, but really a full course on statistics would really get into this inferential statistics far more deeply, looking at running different types of tests to more specifically draw conclusions about the population. We'll do some of it here, but it could really be done on a far greater scale in a full statistics course. Okay. Okay, so just to kind of summarize this, you've got your, and I'm making a lot of hand motions here, but maybe just to see it, if you had your sample, that's your universe, that's everybody, right? We'll call that you, that's the whole sample. And then every little subset of that could be, that's the population. Did I just say sample? That's the population. The universe is the population, okay? And every subset of that universe is a sample. You can have, small samples, you could have big samples, you could have medium-sized samples, you could have samples that intersect. All these are different samples of the population. Now, there are certain conditions on samples that help us to draw better conclusions about the population. Specifically here, these are two types of samples that are very helpful. Random samples, in which the collection of data is such that every element of the population has an equal probability of being selected to the sample. Okay, so when you randomly select, if our population was, say, students at Delta College, you would want every student at Delta to have an equal probability of being chosen to be in your sample. And so if you had a population, let's say, I don't even know how many students there are now, 6,000, 5,000, I don't know, so many students at Delta College, then you would have to find some way of selecting, if you wanted to get like a sample of 100, let's say, to do some study, because you couldn't manage all the data from the population, then you could how could you randomly select those 100 students? Well, perhaps you get a list of student numbers. Now that's confidential technically, but or you could have a computer do this. Within the college there are ways to do that, but you could have maybe a list of all the student numbers, and then have the computer randomly select 100 of those student numbers, and then you figure out, okay, here are the students that correspond to them, and then you could do that. So, but it has to be an equal probability. It has to be, a randomly selected group of people. And that's just an example, but there are other ways to do this. And then your sample should also be representative. A representative sample just means that it shares the general characteristics of the whole population. For instance, if you were looking at students at Delta College and as your population, and I'm not even really sure, but I know there's more females than male students, so let's say there's 60% females and 40% males, although I think it might be even more spread than that. But you would then, in order to be a representative sample, you would want your sample to have the same proportions of male to female, right? You'd want roughly 60% female and 40% male within your sample, so that it's characteristic, it shares the same characteristics of the whole population. And that's true, I'm just throwing male and female out there, but you could do that for proportions of different races, proportions of different socioeconomic classes, proportions of different ages, different things like that. And so proportions of people who live in Saginaw County versus Bay County versus Midland County versus other, there's lots of different ways you could really split that up. I've got a bug buzzing me. Yeah. It's on me. Go. Bye-bye. Anyway, I don't know where it just went. So, I just lost track of what I was talking about. Maybe I'll edit that out, maybe I won't, I don't know, it'll be interesting. So, so a representative sample should have, generally speaking, the same characteristics as the entire population, whereas, and really when you're doing inferential statistics, to have a good inference, to make good inferences, you really want to have random sampling and a representative sample. Probably a representative sample more importantly, but you really do want to have both of these characteristics involved in your sampling process. Now you can get by with some smaller samples if your sample is well representative, okay? But you know, sometimes we need larger samples in order to get good representative samples. So sometimes if you were looking at populations or the population of students at Delta, and you randomly selected 3 students as your sample, well, you might get 2 male and 1 female, and that's definitely not representative of the population on campus, right? You really want it to be the opposite of that, to be somewhat representative, but 3 is a pretty small value. So we do want larger values, but we want larger values that you can still manage and do things with that are productive.